So it's Tuesday, June the 3rd. We're here today with Gordon Maynard. We're at my office because Gordon likes to do things in person. This is a very, this is a very Gordon thing.
Yeah.
Gordon's well known to pretty much everybody in the immigration bar. And we've invited Gordon here because he has recently retired. And so he's recently retired, but aren't you going to CBA conference and speaking at it?
Yes.
This is a very Gordon style retirement.
But that's as much to see colleagues and friends.
Yeah.
I've been to every CLE for 30 some odd years. And I want to go to this one.
Yeah, I hope you keep coming to the conferences every year and speaking, so.
Well, there were a lot of people at your retirement party. There was members of the bar, Department of Justice, CBSA, like everyone it seemed came out.
Yeah,
It was a terrific party
it was so fun.
and a lot of love in the air, I thought. So,
Yeah, there really was. Yeah, no, you've had a pretty magnificent career, so it was good that everybody got to come out and enjoy.
Yeah. So we've done a few episodes with lawyers who were then recently retired, who you all know, Dennis McRae, Joshua Son, Daryl Larson, David Thomas. And I think
Joshua, you said Joshua Son.
Joshua Son,
Yeah.
The starting question that I always have for people who had long practices is sort of how you sustained it. Because there's obviously a rate of attrition in people practicing immigration. Some people, leaving the practice area entirely, others may go to the bench or not for profit or something. You did private practice for 30, trying to remember your speech, 34 years, 35 years?
Started with Dennis McRae in 1990.
35 years.
Wow. Yeah. So how did you sustain it?
Because of CBA.
Which is the Canadian Bar Association.
Correct. Dennis got me into CBA. And what CBA does, first of all, for all lawyers who are young, getting in their own practice, is it gives you colleagues. Dennis was a good mentor. He was a good supporter of CBA. Through him, I attended meetings every month with the British Columbia, the CBA immigration section. And we'd meet at the Vancouver courthouse room and we would sit around and talk about issues. And it was
those meetings, actually, those were fun.
Well, I used to bring McDonald's to them all the time, and that's one of the ways people said they first used to know me, because I would show up with this large fries as people were talking to me.
They were social and work gatherings, but work in a nice way. Where people were free to share their information, they were free to answer questions. People would come up with agendas every month about current topics. We'd bring in speakers, other lawyers would speak. But more than anything is you obtained colleagues. Colleagues who you could call on the phone, colleagues who you could email. And that's a support mechanism that everybody needs, because nobody, maybe except Dennis McRae, can do it alone.
No. He also was very he loved the collegiality.
He did too.
Yeah.
He did too. So that's one, collegiality and support. And the CBA support grew with the event of the listserv, which started up in the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe before that. But, now you had people communicating on the listserv. You can ask any question, get answers, you need that support. Secondly, I was surrounded by people who were better at administration and office management than I ever will be. I was terrible at it. And in fact, in due course, I got out of it. And just focused on being a lawyer and let my colleagues run the office and do the management things. And I think I got in their way more than anything else.
Yeah.
But that was huge for me, because I always told people I have only so many shoe boxes in my head.
Yeah.
And once they start getting full, every time you push something in, something pops out.
That's totally me
So,
too.
Dennis McRae was a great office manager, and he instilled me with great, every month, I would have to go through my file list with him. You did.
I wish you'd still do that for me.
When I left, well, it was great, because Dennis would look at you and say, and what have you done on that one? And this made files stay alive. You never had one go dead.
Yeah, you call them file reviews. You have to come in with your whole client list and be like, and not just about the content of the file, but about like the books, like what was in trust? Did you have money in trust
Yeah,
for the
billing.
next stage and like everything?
You
And
two
that's
didn't
the-
overlap.
No.
No,
we
no,
didn't
no,
overlap.
no.
I was thinking that this is the first, I've not been to your office here before.
Uh,
This is the first time I've been to McRae and Associates since 2002.
2002.
When I
So
left
when we were on
Dennis.
beach?
Yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah,
So we had another entire office
yeah,
for
yeah.
this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Dennis and I started on Canby Street
right.
in a building beside the Law Society, and that was a heritage building. It was lovely. It was like this
Yeah.
in some ways. And then we moved to 1000 Beach Avenue, which is just best office in the world.
Yeah, we were there,
And that's where I was with Dennis for 12 years or 10 years,
right,
12 years actually. At any rate, I lost my train of thought there. I digress.
yeah.
Yes, Dennis would have you go
Shoeboxes.
through, yeah, shoeboxes. Dennis would have you go through the file and not just what you're doing on, but whether or not you'd build it. And I always thought he was doing this more out of interest to make sure the money was coming in, but it was just good practice.
It was good
Yeah, good
practice.
practice. I stopped doing that.
Me
after
too.
McRae Associates, and I regret that. It's something that you need to do. But at McRae, I had MKS, Maynard Kisher Stoicevich. I had Alex Stoicevich, Rudy Kisher, who still carry on in that firm.
Yeah.
Now Kyle is a partner with them.
Yeah,
And they did a great job of management. Alex really had his finger on everything.
Yeah.
And it's a tremendous effort, but that helped make my job easier. And then along with that, I carried on with CBA throughout all that time. And CBA gets you involved with other people. It gets you involved in national opportunities, national activities. You deal with the government. It keeps you very much alive and varied in your work. You're not confined to the office. I would not have seen Canada if it wasn't for CBA.
yeah, for sure. Me
You know, and
too.
every year we have a national conference, as you know, and we travel to the east, sometimes as far as Halifax, more often to Toronto, Ottawa, or Montreal we go to, or Quebec City, or the west, which this year is going to be Victoria, but it's been Banff, it's been Calgary, it's been Winnipeg, you know. So I've gotten to see the country, I've gotten to meet colleagues across the country, I have a network of friends and a network of opportunities to involve myself in law, and that's what gets you through a career in law.
For sure.
I think you have to do that. I really encourage everybody who's in law, in immigration law, to join their CBA section.
Yeah, like your closest friends are within the bar, right? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Michael
Michael.
Green.
I was gonna say, Michael Green
exactly.
came out from Calgary to your retirement party.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, I didn't say enough about
And
Michael
Bear Bell
my
and-
retirement party, and Bear Bell too.
Yeah,
But Michael Green, I met through CBA, and with the two of us were deeply involved and became friends because of our CBA involvement and
Yeah.
because of IRPA.
yeah.
The implementation of IRPA in 2001, which was an
Yeah.
extraordinary process.
Do you want to elaborate on that, like beyond the networking that goes on at CBA, like when you say your work on IRPA, what sort of work does CBA do?
One of the obligations of CBA as a national organization and with national sections is to provide commentary to the government on proposed changes of law. And so when regulations are coming out, when new acts are coming out, CBA lawyers vet them and participate in presenting comments and commentary that hopefully the government takes into consideration during the enactment of the regulations or during the enactment of the law. But IRPA was a particularly
Oh my God.
extraordinary change. We had the 1976 Act, which was then 25 years old. IRPA is now 25 years old. The 76th Act was out of date and riddled with regulations upon regulations. And there was a 5-year process undertaken by the Immigration Department they had green papers and white papers, but then they had the Legislative Reform Secretariat, which was the top civil servants in the department, and then minister at the top of that secretariat. They answered to the minister directly. But there was Joan Atkinson, the acting deputy minister. There was Daniel Terrion, who was their chief legal
That's really
counsel,
cool.
later the head of the Privy Council.
They were part of this, like.
They were part of this
That's really
this
cool.
secretariat. And then there were 3 key personnel in policy and operations. And we, at CBA, we developed a relationship with that secretariat, and we met with them in Ottawa routinely. And whether it was, you know, in the course of parliamentary committee proceedings, Senate proceedings, or just meetings with the secretariat to go over stuff of concern or whether it was meetings with the minister.
Yeah,
We were there and it came to be a trusting relationship,
yeah,
where we gave them good responses to our concerns and they gave us their responses. But it was a fairly opaque situation. I remember Michael Green saying to them one time, he says, you know, we're happy with the dialogue we've had on this issue or that issue. What we don't know, what we're not sure of, is what we're missing. And they just looked at us and one guy said, we're keeping a list.
well, because they're
No,
inhabiting
they're not
conflict, there's certain things they can't talk about.
But it's a question of are they forthright?
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things that I came away with as a result of all of this was enormous respect
For sure.
for the department.
Yeah.
And you've had other people who are economists, forecasters who give their opinions to the department or share information with the
Yeah.
department, have dialogue with them. They say the same thing.
Yeah,
They say these people are professionals. And
yeah,
they've been doing this work for more than 30 years. They've been
Yeah.
doing immigration law for 50 years. Easily in
I
Canada.
do
We have a
think,
very
though,
sophisticated process.
that in the last 5 years, I would say, the engagement with the actual immigration bar has really suffered. And I think that that's something, and that's really been since the introduction of ministerial instruction. It's been gradual, but
yeah.
I think that because, I mean, Mario Bellissimo and I chaired a working group that was trying to propose a new act.
Mhm.
And we wrote this report, it's an 80-page report with 100 recommendations, but again, to get somebody to actually review it in a substantive way, it's a struggle. It really is a struggle. And to have, yes, there's still the regular meetings, but they're sort of more perfunctory than they were when I was chair, which was
Right.
a
And then when
decade.
you were chair was when the government at the time, was it Chris Alexander had called the CBA a bunch of activists?
Yeah,
or,
for sure.
so, repairing things back to where they were.
Right. There's a couple of issues there. One is
Yeah,
they are sensitive.
Mhm.
yeah,
And secondly, there are many different disparate voices speaking at them.
Yeah.
We now have two national organizations, of lawyers. You have
Yeah.
a refugee association.
several,
You
yeah,
have consultants.
Mhm.
You have people who are ad hoc policy lobbyists.
yeah,
And normally, when you get together with them, they try and get everybody's input at once. They don't do it one at a time.
yeah,
And everybody's got an axe to grind, and sometimes they do it with vigor.
Yeah.
And they feel some department people have said, we go to these meetings, we feel like we're just being sat upon,
yeah,
you know?
Mhm.
And you have to also keep in mind that.
Yeah.
That the department is not in control of itself.
yeah, exactly.
They have to
limited,
answer to ministers,
For sure.
right? One of the podcasts I listen to now that I'm retired, I'm reading podcasts, or got my library card.
Totally, yeah.
But one of the podcasts I listen to is Peter Mansbridge.
Mm,
And he does have on Jim, I can't think of his last name. And Buck, I'm gonna have,
Gerald Butts?
yeah, Gerald, and no, but the James,
Moore?
he's a former,
James Moore.
James Moore, former conservative cabinet minister. And he was on the other day, they were talking about the new ministers that were appointed by the Carney government and what they could look forward to.
Mm.
And in the course of that conversation, Moore said, and he wasn't speaking about immigration, he was speaking about all the departments. He said, the civil service will sometimes treat a minister like they're a temporary foreign worker. They're here now, but they'll be gone. They will be replaced.
right, of
All
course,
right.
yeah,
And other times they take pains to inform the minister
right,
when their desires and their policies are not perhaps in the best interests of Canada, that they are political. And that it wouldn't be wise to proceed
Interesting.
with those. And it's a balance that the department always has to keep in mind. Dennis McCrae said it differently.
Mm.
He said, you wonder sometimes who's controlling who.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, is the minister gonna control the department or
Sure.
is the department gonna control the minister?
But I think it also depends on the minister's level of engagement with the portfolio. Like, I think Jason Kenney got a lot of like,
Jason Kenney was very engaged.
he was very engaged, and I think the bureaucrats noticed that, and they were like, he actually understands what we're gonna talk about. And
Right.
whatever position they took with respect to.
I think he had a good working
He
relationship.
did,
with our-
right?
I'm also sure other ministers have.
Yeah.
There's been good ministers and bad ministers that
Yeah.
have come and gone. There's been a lot of ministers over the last
Sure
3 years, a lot over the.
And then, you know, the books will still have to be written since they got reelected on the exact role of PMO versus the minister. Like,
Yeah,
we've talked before how Mark Miller used to muse about a big amnesty program,
yeah,
and he was open with the media saying cabinet overruled him, and
Yeah.
exactly where the powers lie is
yeah,
also opaque.
yeah, that was a really interesting conversation we had with,
Kenny,
no, McCallum.
oh, John McCallum.
Yeah, because I was like, you know, he also had a lot of ideas, and then they just never saw the light of day, and we were just, and in fact, then he immediately got shuffled. But I
Yeah,
can't
he became
remember.
ambassador.
Mhm.
Yeah,
He became ambassador.
yeah, I was like really excited for these things.
Until the Mung Wan Joe incident.
Yeah.
Before we get into the substantive though, there is one other about your career in general, actually a few questions, but one that I would kick myself if I missed. Was that when I was first getting to know you, it was at the top of Seymour Mountain.
Mhm.
And I would have been hiking either by myself or with my family. And I think there were 2 incidents, and I would have been single at the time. So by myself or with friends. And there were 2 incidents, I think, where you had just finished biking up.
Wow,
And he used to do you didn't do the Triple Crown every Saturday, but you did Seymour and Cypress.
wow,
And
that's a
From what
big
I-
ride, isn't it?
oh God, I've never done it.
Oh my
I
God.
would probably do it on my e-bike, but the same.
Yeah.
But I've also heard that you got into biking in your 50s, I think.
Mhm.
Like, to what extent, like, did fitness sort of play a role in longevity of
Great
career?
question.
Or what got you into biking? Like, was that related to
Mental health.
mental health of work issue, or like, was it just, the role of fitness? Because that was one of the like immediate, I just remember being like, damn, when I'm in my like 50s, I want to be doing the double crown every other weekend. Starting from West Van, you'd go to Seymour, yeah.
I would get up at, I would leave at 5 in the morning and I'd be home by 11, if I remember correctly.
Okay,
Yeah,
this is 2 mountains, for those of you who are not from the West Coast, 2 separate mountains, there
Yeah.
are 3, but he did 2 of the 3 in a day.
2 mountains separated by 15 kilometers.
Yeah, that's
Well, yeah.
wild. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, so it was a good ride. But I would say that I've always been active. I've never considered myself an athlete.
Hmm.
I never played any sports with any particular skill,
Hmm.
but I played.
yeah,
I played baseball I taught school before I went to school from 1976 to 1982 and, or 1984, I guess it is. And every Friday at school at 3 o'clock, when school got out, I and 24 other teachers from around the west side of town would meet at Kids Hockey Rink, later Richmond Ice Center, and we'd play hockey.
Huh.
We always had 5:30 at 4 o'clock, or sorry, Friday at 4 o'clock to go play hockey. And it was a great way to end the week, all right? And then on the weekends, I would go out in the morning, and at sunrise, I would play 9 holes of golf at the 9-hole golf course in West Vancouver. Because I don't have time to go for 18 holes.
Yeah.
I rode my bike to work for a number of years. For 10 years, I rode my bike to work.
So did Dennis, by the way, who would sometimes come in from his house in West Van to the
yeah.
office.
This is when you were a teacher, you rode your bike? 'Cause I'm pretty sure you rode your
No, I
bike.
didn't ride my bike when I was a teacher. I started riding when I was a lawyer.
Okay,
And it was not a bad ride to ride into Vancouver. But I got the habit of riding my bike year in or day in, day out. And I wanted to do the Grand Fondo to Whistler.
Wow,
And so
that's really trying.
so that's why I started
Yeah.
climbing mountains.
oh, okay.
And that got in the way of my golf, so I gave up golf and just went for bike
Yeah.
ride.
Oh my goodness.
So, and now my sport is curling. And so I've always kept an activity. I played
Right.
baseball with my daughter. I've always been involved in doing sports.
Yeah,
So So, yeah, I think that's important. It's like, you gotta have hobbies, you gotta have
Yeah.
activities.
Well, that seems like a third pillar of your coping mechanism for endurance, because I think you do need something to like funnel the stuff that gathers in
Yeah.
the head and the heart when you're practicing in this area. You need
Yeah.
some outlet.
Yeah, you do, because Lord knows, I mean, I was talking to one of my young associate lawyers at MKS the other day, and I was talking about how the night before a hearing, I can't get it out of my head, I usually stay up all night, and she says, oh no, she says, whenever I leave the office at 6, nothing stays in my head. I
Wow.
go, wow, how do you do that? Because for me, it's always there,
Yeah.
always there. So you need something to take it away.
Is this a litigator?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah,
For good, and
yeah,
I always thought the law was consuming.
yeah.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, well, but yeah, doing the fitness does focus your mind onto something.
Yeah.
I mean, I get texts sometimes from like different immigration lawyers who will say like, oh my God, like I've gained X number of pounds and the practice is just destroying me. And I always say like, you can't let it, you've got to find that time where you'll look back, and even if your career was successful, you'll wonder, like, was it worth it if it ruined your body?
The thing about fitness too is like when you're on your bike, like if you don't focus only on your bike, you'll crash. So you have to empty everything else out. You have to like dump out those shoe boxes just for the duration of your ride. And it's like, it's so like, then you can come back to them and they're cool, but it's like, there's no alternative to doing that for that time. And some people have to be forced to empty the shoe boxes.
Well, if you pick the right roads, and that's the most important thing in cycling, is to pick the right roads to ride.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of thinking on your riding.
Yeah.
And
But
it's
it's
a
a different
wonderful
kind of thinking
opportunity.
though. Yeah, it's a different kind of thinking because it's not like front brain thinking.
Yeah.
Front brain is like, how do I not die? How do I not die? And then the rest of your brain is just like, it's sort of percolating at a different level. It's not like this section and that section. It's just more, that's what I find anyways. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Can't scroll your phone when you're riding.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
well, this is gonna sound terrible, but I did. I took a Service Canada call. I wasn't sure who was calling. And I answered the phone on Georgia, which was super like risky. And I actually they were like, hi, my name's so-and-so from Service Canada. I was like, I'm actually on my bike. I don't know who I thought you would be, but like.
Yeah, I don't know why I stopped, but I'm near.
No, I had
trigger, yeah.
I don't need bad news on my bike.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So,
and as far as, what would you say like most memorable? Are there certain cases that stand out?
That's
Yeah,
my
it's like
question
gonna be
too. That's awesome, yeah.
Without a doubt. The cases that I did in the Immigration Appeal Division are the most meaningful cases to me.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Is there a particular style of case? Like you're not talking sponsorship appeals, you're talking about removal order appeals.
Yeah,
or.
removal order appeals.
Yeah.
I don't do a lot of IAD, but I remember every one.
Yeah.
I remember every one.
Yeah.
Federal court becomes a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
All the other cases, there's so many, but IAD, so what is it about the Immigration Appeal Division that makes it stand out?
I think it's the most intelligent and reasonable way to deal with circumstances of permanent residents who are facing removal from Canada for whatever sins they've committed. Sometimes it's criminality, often it's criminality, but it can also be misrepresentation. It can also be simply not staying in Canada, residency. And the way our system is designed is that we have lots of possibilities for someone to be inadmissible. And if you become a permanent resident, you can lose your status by being inadmissible. And the test for it is really actually quite broad, right?
Yeah.
If you commit a misrepresentation, which can be almost anything.
Yeah.
If you commit a crime in Canada, that's a crime that has a potential penalty of 10 years or more. You don't have to be sentenced to 10 years, just a potential penalty. Doesn't matter what, doesn't even matter if you weren't sentenced to jail.
Yeah.
You're still inadmissible. And you get that removal order just because your name is Bob, you're a permanent resident, and you're inadmissible. They don't care how long you've been here. They don't care what the circumstances were. They don't care what your family is doing here.
They don't care what happened
about
to you in your
anything.
country of origin.
It's just you get the removal order. And then you go to the IAD as a permanent resident, and only permanent residents have this ability. There's some other circumstances, visa holders, but you can go to the IAD and plead your case, and the government pleads their case. So you have a decision maker, you have the person concerned who says, you're right, I'm inadmissible, but I'd like to have another chance, and here's why. And you got the department that says this person should be thrown out, or they can agree and make a joint representation.
Yeah.
But that is a hearing where both sides are heard and where a decision is made on all the circumstances of the case as to whether or not that person should be removed.
Yeah.
And I would tell people that it's like, if I took you out onto the street in front of the office and we stopped 10 people on the street, 10 Canadian citizens, and I said, I'm going to tell you what this guy's story is.
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you what he did. I'm going to tell you all the facts about it. And I want you to tell me whether or not that person should be thrown out.
Totally.
And if I got my opinion from 10 people on the street, 10 Canadian sober citizens, I would trust that as being a reasonable judgment because I think we're reasonable people.
Mm.
We can make a good decision, all right? And that's what happens at the IED.
Yeah.
And it
That's
is
so
a
well explained.
magnificent process.
Yeah.
And it's to be trusted and it's to be valued,
Yeah.
right? There was a immigration removals officer, this was before there was CBSA, named Rick McNeil. Rick McNeil was a fellow I came across early on in my career. And I was at the immigration division. They had picked up a Polish ship jumper. He had been in Canada, in Vancouver, for about a year. And he was out on Halloween.
I think you answered.
Yeah. See, he needs to be managed. Yeah.
He was out on Halloween. He was drunk. The police picked him up, realized that he was not in status, held him overnight and turned him over to immigration. Now he's going to face overstay and removal, right? And his wife came to me and said, we got married, we were going to do an application. We just haven't got it in. Please let us be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so I went to Rick McNeil, to the hearings officer. He was the hearings officer on the detention review at the time. And I said, can we have a little chat? And I was green as grass at the time. This is one of my first enforcement hearings. And
Put the button on the right side. Right side. Yeah, right side of your phone. Yeah.
just when I just turned
Yeah,
it
there,
off.
there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay, it's on.
Yep.
And I said, Mr. McNeil, can we put this file aside for a while and let this guy do his, like, I want to speak to you. Can we just have a word about it? And so he took me to a room, he sat down and he listened to what I said for a minute. And then he said, Gordon, immigration is an easy business. You let the good guys in and you throw the bad guys in. Which is your guy? And I thought that was so easy
Yeah,
and so insightful.
Yeah.
And that is what the process is about. There's good guys and there's bad guys.
Yeah.
Some people screw up. They should not be let into
for
Canada.
sure.
And when they do screw up, they should be thrown out of Canada.
Yeah,
Other people deserve a second chance.
100%.
But that's a decision we should make when we have knowledge of all the circumstances of the case
Totally.
and on all good reasons. We need to protect Canadian society and we don't need to be vicious about it. Some people should go,
Or
some people
punitive.
should stay.
Yeah, like, or punitive about it, you
Yeah.
know, like,
So, you know, this is to me the right way to do things.
for sure.
And I have always fought to defend the process of the IAD. I have great respect for it. And Greg Zuck was at the retiring party. He's a CBSA hearings
Oh, you know.
officer.
He listens to the podcast, he said.
Yeah, and he's, you
Or at
know,
least a few episodes.
he goes after people in those hearings and he will say, no, this person should not stay. Or he'll say, I'm not gonna take a position on it in light of all the circumstances. Or he may say that I'm willing to allow this person to have another chance, and that means getting a stay order on conditions, like being on probation. And he can be very strict about this. So I mean, this is the way things should be done. And that the IED has been under attack over the years from people who, I mean, one of the things I looked up is something Minister Kenny said when he was Minister of the Immigration Department.
Now we made you turn off your
No,
phone.
I know, I went.
But while you're looking it up, I was gonna say, like, everything you said about the IAD is so true, and you explained it in such a clear way. But when you think about it from the perspective that, like, we have so many decision-making tribunals within the immigration scheme, the court, the refugee protection division, the immigration division. The IAD is the only full jurisdiction tribunal, really, you know, where you can argue case de novo,
Mhm.
equitable jurisdiction. Like in the federal court, you're like,
Well, it's, yeah, you can't introduce new evidence.
No, you can't introduce new
Well,
evidence.
federal
there-
court is not an appeal, it's a
It's not,
judicial review.
exactly. But even at the immigration division, no equitable jurisdiction, right? And at the RPD, it's still like within a very constrained definition, you know, like there are very strict parameters. And if you, there are things that, anyway, so to me, it's always, the bigger issue for me is not about the IAD, it's about restricting access to the IAD. That
Mhm.
like, that I think is the sad thing, because I agree with you. I wish much more went to the IAD. Sometimes that's the only place it can really be sorted.
Sure, and there have been times when opposition parties, immigration critics, have said that the IAD needs to be reined in, that we can't trust them to make difficult decisions
Disagree.
in difficult cases. In the before IRPA.
Then that's what the JR is for.
Yeah, well, before IRPA, the government used a process called danger opinions.
Yeah, yeah,
And if a permanent resident was criminally inadmissible, and normally they would have an appeal before the appeal division, the government could intervene and say, we're gonna issue a danger opinion, because we think this person is so bad that they should not even have the right to go to the appeal division. It's not, no case would allow them to stay, so we should just expedite their removal.
right.
But the danger opinion process got bogged down with people taking those decisions to court because they weren't well done. They weren't
Right.
well thought out, they weren't well worded,
Right.
and they were susceptible to judicial review. So when they rewrote IRPA in 2000, they got rid of danger opinions, instead made a rule saying that if you're a permanent resident in Canada and you get a jail sentence of 2 years incarceration,
There
then
was, yeah, right.
2
Okay,
years.
yes, yeah, no, you're right.
then that is a serious enough crime, that is serious criminality within Canada, that you should not have a right of appeal. Now, we fought against that, because we said,
Yeah.
like, that's gonna work a lot of the time, it's not gonna work all the time, it's not always gonna be fair, there's gonna be cases where you want to exercise discretion.
Yeah.
And the department said, and the minister said, we will do a review, we will do the job that the IAD is doing, but we'll do it on our own, so trust us on this. Well, that didn't work out. Instead, we have this 2-year rule. In 2013, the Conservative government that was in power put in the faster removal of foreign criminals act. And that was under Minister Kenny's, jurisdiction. And what that did was it changed the 2-year rule to a 6-month rule. So you only needed to have a 6-month sentence, and that went off the rails right away, because what the Department of Justice would argue, and the Department of CBSA would argue, is that included conditional sentences of incarceration. That's ridiculous. So it became a 6-month rule, and they threw in that anytime you're inadmissible for an offense outside of Canada, regardless of what the sentence was, even if you never went to jail, you are inadmissible without appeal, because we're going to call that serious criminality. As long as it's an offense in Canada that carries that, if it was committed in Canada and you were given the full sentence, it would be 10 years or more.
Yeah.
And that's silly, because these are cases that in many, in situations like drunk driving now fall under that, without any jail sentence. That can lead to a removal order that is unappealable. Well, I thought was thoughtless. But when that law came out in 2013, this is what Minister Kenny said. This new law will keep Canadians safer by ending endless appeals and loopholes that were being used by dangerous foreign criminals to delay their deportation, during which time many committed more crimes. That is misrepresentation after misrepresentation after misrepresentation.
Yeah.
It didn't apply to foreign criminals, it applied to permanent residents. They're the only ones that had appeals before the appeal division. There's only one appeal. You don't get endless appeals. It's not a loophole. It's the only tribunal where you
Exactly.
consider all the facts of the case, but this is something that we always have to be on guard against. The populist ideas about immigration, the politicians may rely upon in order to put through bad law or in order to gather votes.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
The other thing that's like really interesting about what you said is the department, when this was all being introduced to take power away from the IAD, was saying, our officers will be the ones to review all this.
Yeah.
Fast forward 10, 15 years, and the jurisprudence now is they're not allowed to consider.
Yeah.
They just have to refer it.
I know.
You think they
Now they don't even give you an opportunity to comment on the 44 report. They send it to
like it's
already.
gone the way it's through both the way the
Yeah,
Department of
they are
Justice
empowered,
argues,
yeah.
individual officers that even if what was intended at the outset, unless you think that they always knew it would go this way, that it can just evolve in a way that wasn't initially intended, where now no one knows it.
Right, and, you know, this is, when we were discussing this with the department before the legislative reform secretariat, friend of the minister with their chief legal counsel, and they were saying, we'll do it. And we said, put that in writing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, put
That's
it
the
in writing.
problem.
Where's the guidelines on that?
Yeah.
You know,
And not just in the
And-
Gazette, because you
and-
still can't be held to it.
they did not want to put anything in writing,
I know.
because you put something in writing, then you open it up to JR.
Yeah,
And that's what's happened. And, you know, some lawyers at the time were saying, look, it's not a big deal, but section 44 says you may write a report, that's discretionary. So therefore, we're gonna have input on that.
yeah.
You know, no. There is no.
No, I got
May was
completely shut
interpreted
down.
as meaning
Nothing.
they can write a report, and they shall write a report if you screw up, you
Yeah,
know? Yeah, so,
yeah. But again, sorry, something else about this one, which was, yeah, okay, so when you're talking about offenses like DUI, as soon as you start talking about that, there's like, people are like, but then they should, because there's this sense of like moral culpability, right? But sometimes, like, some of the offenses, like, we're not, I think that the point I'm trying to make is that none of us are trying to endorse, like, yes, criminals should get a free pass, but it's like, sometimes it's like, a lot of the things that I see are crimes that are like literally crimes of poverty, or crimes where somebody was duped into something, you know, and like, here's a check, here's your check, and can you cash it and then give me the money, you know, and so they do that, and then you know, there's an allegation of fraud. There's no trial in the foreign country because they just don't bother, but that's still committing an act, you know? And so like, there are these things that are like,
Yeah,
there's no jury trial, there's no trial whatsoever, and yet there's serious criminality that leads to like a forever ban with no right of appeal. And you might have been here since you were a child, you know, and you might have now children of your own who were born in Canada and no right of appeal. Like, the facts are so like, in theory, it might sound like, okay, well, that tracks, you did something bad and therefore there are these
yeah. I
consequences.
mean, for me, I'm just
But
a big
like,
believer in discretion.
yeah,
Like, you want a scenario where all circumstances can be considered.
yeah, exactly, not just like a
Talked
broad
about
brush.
before is even
let me say
Yeah.
something about that.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, yeah.
Joan Atkinson was in Vancouver. She was the ADM at the time, the Assistant Deputy Minister. And at that time, there was a paper going around that talked about reform to the immigration legislation and how much problems there were with the exercise of discretion. That officers didn't like discretion. They wanted hard and fast rules. This ultimately led to the 2 year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And we
Also, it was around misrep, like whether there should be discretion in how long the misrep bar should, oh no, for 2 years for no
Yeah,
appeal.
And she came and she spoke to the press, and I was in the audience at that time. And she opened up by saying, discretion is the oil that keeps the enforcement
Yeah.
machinery running smoothly.
I get
And that's the line that I had written.
it.
And she looked right at me when she said that.
That's nice,
And I knew they had our point,
yeah,
okay? And that discretion is so important.
I know,
You look at the Supreme Court decisions, Kathasamy in 2016 or 2017, I can't remember what it was. And they talk about the history of discretion in the IAD and why it's used. And the idea is that the law can never be so precise to capture the circumstances of every individual who should be vulnerable to deportation.
the thing about this though, right? You're 100% right, and I'm gonna use that line again. But I think the problem is that with the advent of AI, their new line is discretion is expensive. Because it's like, if it's an automated decision with a IELTS score and a West report, it's binary. Binary can be done by a machine.
Right.
Discretion needs to be done by a human. Humans cost more than the algorithm.
I get it.
And so like, I get
Costs
it.
money.
It costs money. It takes time. It takes way more time for a human to go through and look at all the nuance than it does for a machine to be like, criminal offense? No, you know, like,
Yeah.
and so, but again, my thing, and I think many people's thing and the CBA's thing is like, but at what cost?
Mhm. I think the IAD is a good expensive money, and I
Oh my
don't think
goodness.
it's expensive. I think in the long run, it's very efficient.
I do too. I think you end up losing
And,
some
and
of
we're
your
not
business.
saying, I want to repeat what you said, we're not saying that criminals should be allowed to remain in Canada. We're saying that you look at the case,
Mm.
all right? Throw out the bad guys, let the good guys stay. You know, we cast a big net, you gotta know which fish to keep and which to throw back.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this with Martin when I was like, zero, no misrep, zero bar, obviously, misrep, 5-year bar, nothing in between.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
whether it makes sense to just let officers
For
pick
sure.
something between, although he was adamant, he was saying the same thing, we don't want discretion. Just give us like A equals A, B equals B, and we can quickly move through it was.
Yeah, we also talked about this on the very last episode, which is that the way that the security provisions are rolling, it means like the very, very low hanging fruit, the like conscript junior most member of the IRGC is going to be prohibited, but the the real bad guy probably won't, and so it's like, and again, that's more about some of the nuances of disclosure, but still, like, this binary approach makes no sense.
Yeah. One of the other themes, and I'm wondering if you'll buck the trend, Dennis, Dave, especially Dave, that immigration law became less fun to practice over the years. And I'm wondering if you feel the same. If you go back to like and listen to any of the other retirement episodes, it was like a big enough message that some junior lawyers who listened were like, wow, it really made me wish I was practicing like in the late 90s, early 2000s. Like it's, and Dennis was like, especially saying it became, discretion started to fade, human involvement, AI rising. Like, did you find that it became less fun?
Sure. Something's a kilter when your only opportunity to have human interaction is if you go down to the port of entry and deal with CBSA.
Yeah.
Right.
And now you can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. You're supposed to engage discussion.
That was
Yeah,
the only
yeah.
fun I was getting.
Yeah.
No, there's no question. And it started with the idea of centralized processing office, centralized processing centers. It used to be that all the offices were processing work permits and PR and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
We're downtown Vancouver on Bernie Street, on House Street, and you would go there and you would see officers.
Yeah.
Right? And
And I feel like good lawyers knew how to like be respectful of not getting in their faces when you didn't need to get into their faces.
well, my advice to young lawyers and the advice that I have followed all the way through my career is to treat everybody with respect. Don't assume they're all devils. They're not. They're not. They're doing their job.
Yeah.
And I have enormous respect for the department. What I don't have respect for is the process now. I think that we've lost a lot of the opportunity that we had before to deal with the human interaction. The other day I was at the IAD. I went in just to see one of my associates, young associates or former associates, doing a hearing of a client that I had passed on to her. And I had told her, do this hearing in person, it's important. I went into the hearing room, and ultimately the board member was saying a few words with us, and as was the CBSA officer. And they were talking about how they just don't see any hearings in person anymore. This is only the second one they've seen. And Greg Zuck was the officer. He says, it's the only second one I've seen in the last year. He says, the other one was with you, Gordon. And they say a lot of them, so many are done on the internet now. People don't understand why it's important to be there in person. It's important to be in person because the windows are the eyes of the soul, or the eyes are the window to the soul. And you have somebody looking at the board member and looking at the officer, and the officer looking at them, and you're reading the body language and you're listening, then you're seeing how the voice operates. And for the same reason it's hard to do hearings with an interpreter. Because somebody speaks and then you get the words and you're not associating the words with the body. It loses its connection.
Yeah.
Same thing happens when you do it over the internet. Yeah.
The reason that I haven't insisted on,
sorry.
yeah, please.
Yeah, the fun part.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not as much fun as it used to be, but I don't know if that's solely associated to the changes in the system. When I was an articling student or the first year associate with Bud Peterson, which was a corporate commercial law firm downtown, at one point I was supposed to collect from from a client who had lost in a civil case. And I phoned up the client's lawyer and I was browbeating them to, pay the money over. And the lawyer, who was much more experienced than me, probably getting close to retirement, he said, and this would be 1989. He said, I remember when law was fun.
Oh, my goodness.
So I think everybody,
Yeah.
the fun diminishes, I think, with time anyways.
Mhm.
But yes, it has diminished. What bothers me is the lack of humanity in the application right now. Just the communications you get. They don't have an address on it.
Yeah.
Nobody's
No
name is
name.
on them. There's no human associated with your
Yeah, I know,
file,
that's true.
Yeah.
You're going through, the only contacts through web form, which isn't bad. I found web form to be effective as long as you can say what you needed to say and.
Except they don't match it up sometimes and
Yeah,
then they
sometimes
use because they haven't seen.
I noticed that there has been a change, that in the last year, the letters started to get friendlier. They have a
Very
human
recently.
tone, maybe that's the AI at work.
It is.
Yeah.
But-
The AI is made to sound more human than.
Yeah, but, and now they're getting rid of staff, and so what are they, they're cutting 3,000 staff?
Cutting, I think it's 25%. I've also heard there's cuts coming to DOJ, which will be interesting.
Oh, man. So I mean, I think it is less fun, and I think that, part of this could be solved.
I'm interested in this. I was gonna ask if you think there's a solution, so.
Well, I think that we're at an impasse in Canada immigration right now. We're at least at a point where there's going to be an inflection point, let's say. We've seen a mess. Last fall was one thing after another.
Ciao, guys.
Bye-bye.
Sorry, I can't join for lunch.
So Deanna has to go on a working group or just announce legislation. How do we actually turn it off?
It's like, don't, it's Zoom.
Okay,
Yeah, just use the mouse.
yeah.
Okay.
I think we're at an inflection point. We saw in the last 2 years and in last fall in particular, a whole series of activities to address a mess that was of the department's making somehow. Involving work permits and study permits getting out of control, tens and hundreds of thousands of permits that and authorizations that were impacting us harshly, and the infrastructure being unable to accommodate it. It just didn't make sense. Now we're seeing the fallout from that and the changes that are ongoing. On top of that, we have Donald Trump in the United States and the American administration threatening Canadians' economic viability. And we are tied to the United States economically. And the general consensus, I think, is that we need to untie ourselves, that we need to look outward, develop relationships with other countries, develop a manufacturing and export industry, set up trade outside of the United States. I believe that our immigration program is very well situated to help us do that. My worry is that there's not the political will. It's hard. We need direction, we need leadership. But I think if we have leadership, if we have the provinces on board, if we see things like shipping systems, rail systems, pipelines going east, west, and north, ports, development of export markets, development of export products, whether it's AI, whether it's aerospace, whether it's green energy, whether it's nuclear generators, I think that we are in a position where we can change the pathway that Canada's going to follow in the next century, this century. And I think that immigration program is very well suited at this point for all the complaints about ministers' instructions and the flexibility that they gave themselves without having to go through Parliament or the regulatory process. I think is precisely what we do need to help adapt our program to the needs of this next century, if we can get on board with understanding what those needs are. I think that some people are talking about whether we need to have a new national consensus on immigration, whether it's white papers, green papers, or what have you. I think what there needs to be is thoughtful communication with Canadians to explain what the immigration program does for us, where we're going to go in the future, and how it's going to be used in the future. You've had some very good people on your program talking about our declining birth rate, talking about our aging population, talking about a diminishing growth, growth natural product. All of these, and now the need to decouple ourselves from the United States. I think we're in a very interesting time, and I'm excited about it. I hope that we have the political will and the unity nationally to march through this process. And if we do, I think we can look to our immigration program to really assist us in this. You want a national housing program that's going to build 500,000 homes across Canada? How many workers do you need to make that happen and make it happen in a timely manner? Right? You want to build national supply chains, supply lines, connecting ports and products. You want to develop markets overseas. Tell me what that's going to need in specialized people coming in. And look at our foreign worker program. I traveled in March and April to Cambodia and Vietnam. Vietnam is one of those countries that has raised itself from low production, one of the bottom third countries in the world in terms of per capita income, to middle. And they did it with a central government that was focused on developing, shipping, and marketing of their prime product, which is textiles. China did it. They have a strong central government, of course, and they focused and they developed their production chains. They're a supply chain supplier for the world. We need to have a strong central vision. We need to have focus, as one of your commentators talked about, laser focus on where we're going and laser focus on how we're going to use our immigration program to help accommodate that. I think that's very exciting, and I think it's doable.
Right now, I'm curious your thoughts on the Francophone thing. Where the target, because you say all that, the housing, strategic projects, and so far, the immigration minister has just talked about Carney's commitment to the 12%, to increasing Francophone targets to 12%, which, as long as there's a cap on overall levels, which there always will be, just takes away from housing, strategic projects.
Takes away the selection of highly specialized workers.
You witness politics for, how often is it if a government is leading off with this as their commitment, how likely is it, do you think, that they do vie away? Because it does seem to contradict, there will be those who say that restoring the lost demographic weight of Francophones is of great national importance, but it does, in a zero-sum game, take away from those other objectives.
Yes. Well, as you know, we do need, let's say, a level of 1% of the population immigration just to provide adequate population growth and to stave off the rapid aging of the population. So let's say 1% is our target. And let's say we're talking about 450,000 immigrants a year.
Yeah.
Those aren't all Francophone selected. But you're right, as one of your speakers said, 25% are family, 15% are humanitarian refugee. The rest, that's 40%, 25, 35, 40% right there. And then the rest are economic, but 12% are Francophone, right? Which means that less than 50% are strongly economic help, right?
Yeah.
But we do need those numbers just to keep the population going. We still have room to select. And right now our selection is bifurcated everywhere. I mean, there's this program, there's that program, there's occupational categories, there's PNP, as they have left. And there's room to say, look, the people we've been bringing in, they've got us the numbers. We've never had a problem getting the numbers, but really we haven't been laser focused on economic growth. We've been trying to satisfy everybody. Everybody who has a lobby issue, everybody who thinks somebody's been left out, whether it's the construction workers in Toronto, or it's the Ukrainian population that's here, everybody, or it's going to be global change migration, or climate change migration. We've got to develop focus to say, look, we have a plan for where we want to go economically. Never mind, we got our Francophones, we got our 12% there, we've got our other group of people. We have room now to focus on what we need to help us make this economic direction happen. And that's where the focus has to be. Let's make sure that the rest of our immigrant selection, the rest of our numbers are focused on that. And I think there's room for that.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm like you. I happen to think that we're kind of in the worst of it now, and that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think same like with when it comes to this AI Chinook. I think it's going to a scenario where it's going to be increasingly AI making the decisions, but better reasoned than what is now for sure. And then what even a human would do, assuming the humans aren't reading the applications. So I think so the final question, I guess, then is for young people who are just starting out. Words of wisdom. Because I think there is a huge ask. I think you're going to be speaking on this a bit at CBA this week on words of wisdom, because one thing, unfortunately, is with COVID, even CBA is less in person than it used to be. Mm-hmm. And the ability to just like meet people. Like what's funny, like without the in-person meetings, I don't think if it was for CBA that I would have recognized you on that mountain. Or like we wouldn't be here today. Like exactly. Those opportunities just they're not, because CBA is now increasingly online. Yeah. And so those abilities to get like the wisdom, like words of wisdom.
Does provincial CBA still meet in person, or do they just do it over the
provincial CBA is a mix. I think they do some in person, some online. OLG, the Overseas Lawyer Group, is, I think, well, MKS did one in person, and I think the rest are all online throughout the year.
Yeah. All right, so it's important to have contact with people, and joining CBA is the first rule. That is going to give you contact with people. It may not always be in person, but you're going to have names and faces over time that you will collect. You always save the phone numbers, make sure your contacts are up to date, and don't be afraid to speak to people. Yeah. You're not working alone, right? And one thing we haven't talked here is about your clients, right? The clients, when I left teaching and went into ultimately immigration law, I mean, I went through law school. They didn't have immigration law. I didn't know about it when I went through law school. I didn't know about it when I started with Bowden Peterson. They didn't have immigration law. I only got into it when I left Bowden Peterson, worked for a year with my friend Ian Flanagan, who had inherited an office that had some immigration in it and some consultants sitting there in the office as well. Yeah. And I learned from them for a year before I joined Dennis. In my practice, I always tried to keep input of workers and subsequent PR applications that arose from that, doing work for companies who had a need to make workers go back and forth across the border. I always tried to keep that at least half my business, right? Because it's interesting and you're dealing with people. I went into immigration law because it was dealing with people. Yeah. I didn't like being in a corporate commercial office where everybody's last name is LTD. Yeah. But immigration is a human business. Your clients are humans. I love doing work permits because they're interesting. They're academically stimulating. They're puzzles. They're puzzles. You're trying to figure out what horse to ride. Yeah, and then you're gathering information and making representations and trying to fit it through the pigeonhole that it needs to go to go through the bureaucratic. It's like kids with those things where they're trying to put the shapes in the box. Yeah, absolutely. It might be instinct. And along the way, you learn about the business. Yeah. You speak with the people in the business. You're asking them the questions that you need to know. You're learning stuff about what kind of businesses are operating here in your city, and what kind of people they're trying to bring in. And businesses always have a good reason why they want to bring people in. It's rarely because it's cousin Bob. Yeah. It's usually a damn good reason. Yeah. They need a foreign worker, and you need to convince somebody that worker can either get an LMIA or can pass through the border without one. Yeah. And you're learning all the time in that, not just about the immigration process, but of the stuff that's going on outside your office, about how businesses are working. And I found that great, right? And then there were my clients on enforcement, and then you have PR applications that kind of flow from that. You're dealing with the workers who are moving on through the PR process. Some of them get married, they want you to bring over their wife, from overseas, or their partner from overseas. So you're doing that. And then in enforcement, you're dealing with real humans who have real problems, you know? And again, it's an academic puzzle, but it's a human puzzle too, a real human puzzle. And if you're lucky enough to have a case that's in front of the IED, I always say to my clients that everything happens for a reason. There's a reason why you screwed up. I don't understand what it is yet. I don't know what it is, and I don't think you told me the whole story, but we're gonna learn it over time. I wanna know what the reason is, because until I can figure that out, I don't quite have that string that I wanna pull on your case. You know? Yeah. Now, sometimes you get people who are just bad people, and that reason is not good. I rarely met anybody like that, rarely. In every case that I dealt with, I sat there and said, oh my God, there for the grace of God, go I. You know, and some of these stories are just so damn interesting. It's a wonder they didn't turn out worse than they did, you know, but they don't even process that sometimes, you know, it's news to you, but for them, it's old news. And I always said, it isn't that immigration or CBSA or whoever, it isn't that they don't have a heart. They don't have eyes and ears. So they rely upon you and your client to tell them everything they need to know before they go on this enforcement path. I didn't always have to win at the IAD. I often did. I often did. But I also won with CBSA when they give you that letter that says, you know, the fairness letter. And from time to time, you can give them a case. And if you give them the information and they see what you got, they can make their own decision to say, we're not going to go through on this. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's extremely important when you're having a case, for instance, where there's no right of appeal, where it's unappealable to the appeal division.
Would you say then that the pivot is also to do more than one area of immigration? Because something like to do more, like, so you're describing you had work permits and corporate, and then also the enforcement side.
Right.
And to have that mix.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I know quite a few people, like I have a similar type practice, and there's a lot of people who have only one or the other.
Right.
And it's always surprised me, it's either, it's actually more often that I hear from people who do the enforcement side that they think the corporate and work permit side would be like too corporate, too boring, not fit who they think they are. Yeah, exactly.
And you know, the nice thing about work permits is they have a beginning and an end. I don't need the work permit itself. Although that's nice too, because then you get to work again. But
yeah,
no, the application process. Your client phones you and says, I need to get Jim in from Birmingham, you know, how soon do you need it? What's this all about? Now you've got a time frame to put together an application, submit it, get it processed. Jim comes through the border, gets his work permit, Bob's your uncle. Okay? It had a beginning and it had an end. So many enforcement applications go on and on and on, and they take a lot of time to do.
yeah.
I think just for the beginning and end business, and for the fact that you can charge a corporate client, you have to charge a reasonable fee. It has to be, you know, meaningful, reasonable fee. But you do it, you get paid, you move on to the next one, okay? Whereas the enforcement ones, I always spent way more time on enforcement files than I ever got paid for, right? And these people didn't have bank accounts that they could, and they didn't have insurance policies, you know? This wasn't an ICBC case. They had to pay you out of their pocket, and if they had to go to federal court, they had to go to federal court. And I always told clients, I can't afford me, you know? But you have to charge them the right amount. And nowadays, everybody sits there and says, what does it cost to go to federal court? What does it cost to go to the IAD? If I put in the time on this, and you're starting to tell people, this is gonna be like buying a car, you know, or a small car. Yeah, maybe 2 cars. But you know, no, it's not like buying a car. That's vacuum cars for cheaper. I never think I charged enough, but I also thought that these people couldn't afford to pay enough, you know?
It's a very hard balance.
Hard balance, it is, but it's very human. You learn so much from those cases, and it's so meaningful to the clients. Over the years, I've had phone calls on New Year's Eve from somebody that I hadn't seen in 20 years. And they just wanted to say hi. Thank
Well,
you.
you had former clients at your going away.
Yeah, 5 players there. Yeah, there's others I could have had that I wouldn't bring because it's too private, too personal, you know? Yeah.
No, I really like that point on having multiple, well, especially now with some of the changes, like people who only did study permits are just getting hammered right now.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas if you have multiple, and then it's interesting, it keeps it diverse. And yeah, like I think that the work permit side is interesting. It's always interesting. I've always find it interesting when you have people both, you know, with a solely enforcement or refugee practice, both complaining about the business side of it. And when you ask, have you considered work permits, we'll say, well, that's just not me. I'm not that type of, I'm not corporate. And I don't consider like either you or me to be like your stereotypical corporate.
No,
But yeah, it's like
I left the corporate firm. I didn't like it.
yeah, exactly.
No, this is much more interesting when you get from the immigration perspective.
Mhm.
And when people ask me, why did you go into law? Like I said, I was a teacher for 8 years, and I love teaching, but I left it because of political reasons at the time in the province and the way the education system wasn't being funded. And I said, I got angry.
I don't think that's changed.
And then, and then I went into ultimately immigration law because I saw it being a human business too. I went into education because I thought it was a human business. I went into immigration law because it was a human business. And I have not been disappointed. Both of them are human businesses.
Yeah.
At my retirement party, Dave Thomas, who was there, was a former student of mine.
Yeah.
As was a lady from our staff who was also Annette, who was also a student of mine. They were classmates, in fact. All right, so they were both at my retirement party. And David brought along a bunch of notes from my former students. Now, this is going back to 1980 at least.
Yeah.
You know, so we're talking, these people are now retired, and they're writing letters to me, you know. Dealing with human beings, if you can make a living at it, it's a great experience. And particularly when you're working for them in such a meaningful way, right? So
I think that's a great point to end on. That's a good, like, dealing with humans. If you can make a business and a career out of it, I think that's a great optimistic note after the ups and downs of immigration law. This has been great. Thanks. Thanks for coming on. We'll see how much you repeat on Friday or Saturday when you're presenting at CBA.
yeah, see you at CBA, CLE.
I have to figure out Deanna's